Welcome, travelers of Middle-earth, to another deep dive into the legends of Arda. We often hear of the Elves as the fairest and most gifted of all the free peoples, the firstborn of Ilúvatar, immortal and wise beyond measure. But were they truly perfect? The answer, as any scholar of the lore would tell you, is a resounding no. From the tragic hubris of Fëanor to the betrayals that led to the doom of Númenor, the Elves were as flawed as they were mighty. Their choices, often guided by pride, vengeance, or folly, shaped the history of Middle-earth as much as any deed of Morgoth or Sauron. So, gather close as we unravel the mistakes of the Elves, the consequences of their missteps, and the lessons their long years should have taught them. We begin in the years of the trees, before the First Age, when the Elves awoke under the starlit sky of Cuiveanen. Even then, some among them hesitated when the summons of the Valar came, fearing the unknown lands of the West. This choice, the first division of their kind, would shape their fate forever. The Avari, the unwilling, refused to leave Middle-earth, while the Eldar set forth on the great journey, but even those who followed the summons did not all complete it. The Teleri lingered, and some of their kin, the Nandor, turned aside entirely, never reaching Aman. This hesitation and division would later echo in the sundering of the Noldor, for the seeds of discord had already been sown. Yet it was in the blessed realm of Valinor that the Elves' greatest folly took root. The Noldor, led by Finwë and his house, were the most skilled of their kind, ever seeking knowledge and craft. But in their pursuit of mastery they also bred ambition, and none more so than Fëanor, son of Finwë. He crafted the Silmarils, the greatest jewels to ever grace the world, capturing within them the light of the two trees of Valinor. But in his pride he refused to share them, and when Melkor, the first Dark Lord, coveted them, he found fertile ground for his lies. Fëanor's distrust and arrogance led him to defy the Valar, branding his own half-brother Fingolfin a traitor. And when Melkor struck, slaying Finwë and stealing the Silmarils, Fëanor's wrath set in motion a doom that would haunt the Noldor for ages. In the year of the darkening of Valinor, Fëanor and his sons swore the terrible oath of the Silmarils, binding themselves to pursue their jewels at any cost. This oath, as told in the Silmarillion, was their greatest sin, for it was made without wisdom and with no regard for its consequences. When the Valar hesitated to act, Fëanor stirred the Noldor to rebellion, leading them away from paradise and into exile. But their departure was marred by the first kinslaying, the slaughter of the Teleri at Alcalondi, where Fëanor and his followers slew their own kin to seize the ships they refused to give. This, above all else, was an act of grave wrongdoing, staining the hands of the Noldor with the blood of their brethren. And for this, the doom of Mandos was pronounced, a curse that would shadow them through the ages. Yet, even as the Noldor reached Middle-earth, seeking vengeance against Morgoth, their greatest enemy was often themselves. The divided houses of the Noldorin princes fought among each other as much as against their true foe, and each sought glory and dominion over lands they claimed as their own. Fëanor himself, reckless and blinded by wrath, perished in battle within a year of their arrival. But his sons carried forth the burden of his oath, leading to further tragedies: the betrayal of Maedhros, the sack of Doriath, and the fall of Gondolin, each a mark of their refusal to abandon their doomed path. The doom of the Noldor did not only manifest in bloodshed and sorrow, but in their failure to heed wisdom when it was offered. When Fingolfin took the high kingship of the Noldor after Fëanor's fall, he sought to unite their scattered houses. Yet, the sons of Fëanor, still bound by their oath, held their own councils, and the rivalries among the Noldorin princes deepened. The greatest tragedy of all was perhaps the fate of Maedhros, eldest of Fëanor's sons, who initially sought to make amends by relinquishing his claim to kingship in favor of Fingolfin. But even he could not break the chains of the oath, and though he had wisdom, it was not enough to undo the evil of his father's legacy. One of the gravest errors of the Noldor came in their dealings with men. While some, like Finrod Felagund, saw in the Edain the potential for greatness and befriended them, others among the elves held men in disdain. The Sindar, led by King Thingol of Doriath, mistrusted them, and Thingol forbade men from settling in his lands, save for a few exceptions. This pride and unwillingness to aid the race of men contributed to their eventual subjugation by Morgoth. Even worse was the distrust sown among elves and men when Celegorm and Curufin, sons of Feanor, betrayed Finrod's oath to Beren and left him to die in the dungeons of Sauron. The betrayal of Finrod, one of the noblest of the Eldar, was a shameful act, marking how deep the corruption of Feanor's oath had spread among his kin. The kinslaying at Alqualond was only the first of many slaughters the elves would inflict upon their own. In the Silmarillion, it is told how the oath of Feanor drove his sons to commit further atrocities. When Beren and Luthien achieved the impossible, retrieving a Silmaril from Morgoth's Iron Crown, Thingol, now obsessed with the jewel, sought to have it set into Nauglamir, a famed dwarven necklace. But his greed proved his undoing, for the dwarves of Nogrod, angered by his insults, slew him and sacked Doriath. In the chaos that followed, the sons of Feanor descended upon the ruin, committing the second kinslaying, slaughtering the people of Doriath in a desperate bid to reclaim the Silmaril. The betrayal of their own kin continued with the third kinslaying at the havens of Sirion, where they slew even elven children and those who had sought refuge from war. The blood of these innocents stained the hands of the Noldor forever. But the failings of the elves were not confined to the First Age. When Morgoth was finally overthrown in the War of Wrath and his fortress of Angband was cast down in the year 587 of the First Age, the surviving Noldor were offered a chance at redemption. Yet some refused to return to the west, choosing instead to remain in Middle-earth, bound by grief, pride, or lingering oaths. The Silmarils, which had caused so much suffering, were finally lost. One taken into the earth, another cast into the sea, and the last into the heavens by Eärendil. The oath of Feanor had led only to ruin, proving the folly of the Noldor's arrogance. With the dawn of the Second Age, the Eldar had another chance to guide Middle-earth toward peace, but even then, errors were made. The greatest of these was their role in the forging of the Rings of Power. Celebrimbor, a descendant of Feanor, sought to surpass his forebears in craftsmanship, and in his desire to create wonders, he was deceived by Sauron. Posing as Anatar, Lord of Gifts, Sauron played upon the Noldor's pride, convincing them that through their rings they could heal Middle-earth and preserve its beauty forever. But beauty held by force is a fleeting thing, and the three rings of the elves, though not tainted by Sauron's direct touch, still bound them to the fate of the One Ring. This mistake would haunt them through the Third Age. The failure of the elves in the Second Age was not only their blindness to Sauron's deception, but also their inability to recognize the peril of their own designs. When Sauron's treachery was revealed, and he forged the One Ring in year 1600 of the Second Age, Celebrimbor and his people attempted to resist, but the damage was already done. The Rings of Power had been scattered, some taken by men, others by dwarfs, and the three rings of the elves, though hidden, remained tied to the fate of the One. The war that followed saw the fall of Eregion and the slaughter of its people, and yet even in their defeat, the Noldor refused to take responsibility for their part in Sauron's rise. Instead, they fled, leaving Middle-earth's fate increasingly in the hands of men. In year 3319 of the Second Age, the greatest consequence of the elves' misjudgment came to pass: the downfall of Numenor. While the direct cause of Numenor's fall was the corruption of Ar-Pharazôn and the arrogance of men in challenging the Valar, it was the elves who had first set Numenor upon this path. By favoring the Númenórean kings and fostering their love for the undying lands, they created a longing in men that could never be fulfilled. The Númenóreans, denied the immortality they so desired, grew resentful, and as Sauron worked his deception, they turned against the Valar and the Eldar alike. Though Elendil and his faithful survived, Númenor's destruction was a reminder that the wisdom of the Eldar was not infallible, nor was their influence always a blessing. As the Third Age dawned, the elves had dwindled. No longer the mighty rulers of Middle-earth, they became a hidden people, retreating into their havens in Rivendell and Lothlorien, leaving the fate of the world to men. But their errors did not cease. When Isildur cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand in year 3441 of the Second Age, Elrond and Círdan stood beside him at the cracks of doom. They urged him to destroy the ring then and there, yet when he refused, they did nothing. Their failure to act in that moment allowed the ring to endure, and Sauron's spirit, though weakened, would one day rise again. Had they taken the ring from Isildur by force, or convinced him with greater resolve, much of Middle-earth's later suffering might have been avoided. The Elves also bore responsibility for their treatment of the other free peoples. The woodland elves of Mirkwood, under Thranduil, harbored suspicion toward dwarves, a resentment dating back to the ruin of Doriath. This mistrust led to the imprisonment of Thorin and his company during their quest to reclaim Erebor in year 2941 of the Third Age. While Thranduil's caution was not unfounded, it nearly cost the Free Peoples a crucial alliance, one that would only be forged in battle when the forces of elves, men and dwarves united against the orcs in the Battle of the Five Armies. Galadriel, one of the most powerful and wise of the Eldar, also bore her share of pride. Though she was one of the few to see the deception of Anatar before the rings were forged, she chose to remain in Middle-earth rather than return to Valinor when offered the chance. Even in the Third Age, when the War of the Ring came, she struggled with the temptation of power. When Frodo offered her the One Ring, she saw in it the possibility of creating a realm of eternal beauty, a land where the decay of time could never touch her people. In place of the Dark Lord, you would have a queen, not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn, she declared. It was only through great wisdom and humility that she rejected this temptation, acknowledging that the time of the elves had passed. The elves were not without virtue, nor were their deeds without nobility. But the legend that they were without flaw is a myth. Their arrogance, their blindness, and their reluctance to let go of their power shaped Middle-earth just as much as the evils they opposed. The fading of the Eldar was not only a result of time, but of their own mistakes. By the end of the Third Age, most had sailed west, leaving the world they had once ruled in the hands of men. And perhaps, in the end, that was their greatest wisdom, to recognize at last that Middle-earth was no longer theirs to govern. Though the elves are often depicted as ethereal, wise, and above the petty struggles of the world, the truth of their nature is more complex. Some among them indeed embodied the highest virtues of their kind: selflessness, foresight, and nobility of spirit, while others fell into pride, vengeance, and even cruelty. By contrasting these figures, we can better understand that the elves were not monolithic in their nature. Some sought wisdom and redemption, while others clung to their flaws until the bitter end. Take Finrod Felagund, the fairest example of elven virtue. Unlike his cousins, who sought dominion and vengeance in Middle-earth, Finrod came not to rule, but to build. He welcomed men into Beleriand, gifting them wisdom and friendship when others, like King Thingol, viewed them with suspicion. His greatest test came when he swore an oath to aid Beren. Though this oath brought him into Sauron's dungeons, he did not waver. When the Dark Lord sent a werewolf to devour Beren, Finrod broke his chains with sheer will, slaying the beast with his bare hands. He died, saving his friend, a stark contrast to the sons of Feanor, whose oaths led only to ruin and treachery. Finrod was a shining beacon of what the elves could be at their best, choosing love and sacrifice over ambition. In contrast, his cousin Celegorm was an embodiment of the worst elven traits. Though he was noble by birth, he was ruthless in action, seizing power in Nargothrond through deceit and imprisoning Luthien to force her into marriage. Where Finrod upheld his word even at the cost of his life, Celegorm saw oaths only as tools for his own advancement. His betrayal of Beren and Luthien was not only dishonorable, but also foolish, for their quest would ultimately change the fate of the world. Celegorm and his brothers, so consumed by their oath to reclaim the Silmarils, saw only their own desires and not the greater battle against Morgoth. Their deaths were fittingly unremarkable, slain in another hopeless attempt to seize a Silmaril. their lives reduced to a cycle of greed and destruction. Even among the rulers of elven realms, this contrast persists. Consider Elrond and Thranduil, two powerful elven lords of the Third Age. Elrond, despite his great wisdom, understood the necessity of guiding Middle-earth's younger races rather than ruling over them. He fostered men and hobbits alike, trained Aragorn in the ways of kingship, and provided counsel to those who would shape the world's future. He recognized that the time of the elves was fading and sought to ensure a future where Middle-earth could endure without them. His role in the War of the Ring was not to wield a sword, but to provide wisdom, guidance, and sanctuary. Thranduil, however, was more isolationist. Though a mighty ruler, he kept his people hidden in Mirkwood, mistrustful of dwarves and unwilling to engage in the wider struggles of the world. While Elrond sought alliances, Thranduil preferred solitude, guarding his borders rather than shaping the fate of Middle-earth. This reluctance to act, though not as destructive as the pride of the Noldor, nonetheless reflects the failings of the elves. Their dwindling influence was not solely because of fading numbers. It was also due to their own unwillingness to involve themselves in the world's affairs beyond their own realms. Galadriel too stands at the crossroads between virtue and flaw. A figure of immense wisdom, she was one of the few to reject Sauron's lies. Yet her own ambitions kept her bound to Middle-earth. Unlike Finrod, who sought no dominion, Galadriel desired to rule, and for much of her life she sought a kingdom of her own. Her long refusal to return to Valinor was not out of necessity, but because she wished to remain a queen in Middle-earth. It was only when Frodo offered her the One Ring that she truly understood the danger of her own desires. Her famous words, "I pass the test, I will diminish and go into the West and remain Galadriel," marked the final wisdom she attained. The realization that true greatness lay in letting go of power, not clinging to it. Thus, while some elves, like Finrod and Elrond, embodied wisdom and selflessness, others, like Celegorm and Thranduil, were bound by pride, isolation, or ambition. Even those who sought to do good, like Galadriel, struggled with their own temptations. This is what makes the elves so fascinating. Not their perfection, but their complexity. They were beings of immense beauty and skill, yet capable of folly and error. Their downfall was not because they lacked power or knowledge, but because they, like all beings in Arda, were subject to their own hearts. And in the end, it was those who embraced humility and sacrifice rather than dominance and vengeance who left the greatest legacy.